we were, when the Israelis kind of there was a multinational force, and there was tension between the multinational force and the Israeli army that was in and surrounding Beirut. And so the multinational force, they decided, it was Italian, French, and American, they decided to kind of vacate some of their positions. And Arafat had protested at the time, saying, my people are going to get massacred if you pull out as a peacekeeping force. And a lot happened then. There were hurried elections. Bashir Gemayel was elected. He was president-elect. And on August 14, there was a huge explosion at Phalange Party headquarters where he was chairing a meeting. And of course, he died late that night from his wounds. And on the next day, Ariel Sharon, who was defense minister, went to pay his condolences. Elias Sarkis had gone the night before. This was how I managed to confirm that he had died, because this was kind of kept under wraps for most of the day. What the Israelis told the leadership of the Phalange and Lebanese forces militias was, we have been in trouble with the Reagan administration for what has happened to the civilian population. And now there are all these terrorists still in the camp of Sabra and Shatila, and it is your job to go in and clean up the camps. They didn't tell them go massacre. But as many of the involved militia leaders described to me 10 years later, when I did an anniversary piece, they were full of rage, and they were really grieving for their leader, the person they had fought for, the person who was with them in the trenches. He had been assassinated, and eventually a force of Lebanese forces and the Elias Haddad, I don't think Haddad, the Haddad militia, which was a Lebanese militia composed of Shiites and Christians from South Lebanon under the leadership of a defected general from the army called Saad Haddad. But it was trained, equipped, paid by the Israelis. They converged on the camps and went in and started calling on residents to come out. And when families would come out, sometimes they separated the men and the women, and they just shot them down. They mowed them down like rag dolls. There were at least 900, 1,000 people dead in Sabra and Shatila, and they weren't fighters. They were vegetable vendors, little craftsmen, and some women. When we caught wind of the fact that something was going on, in the 3 days after the assassination of Bashir Gemayel, we would try to go close to the vicinity of the camps, and we couldn't. It was surrounded by Israeli soldiers on their stomachs, and at night we would see flares. And the Israelis were dropping flares so the militiamen could see what they were doing. And everyone at the Commodore had an inkling, a suspicion that someone was massacring in the camps. And it wasn't until a British nurse, Pauline Cutting, and some of her colleagues ran out of the camps, ran out of Burj Baraji and other camps, and walked to the Commodore Hotel, and they briefed us at like 7 in the morning about what was happening. And I went in with Lauren Jenkins, Karsten Tveit from Norwegian television, Robert Fisk was with us, and eventually other journalists filtered in. Tom Friedman had by then started working for the New York Times. Lauren and I briefed him. I mean, this was big enough. There was no rivalry. The story had to go out. And some of the reports were sent out by taxi via Damascus. Some had to go through the Israeli censorship office in Yerzeh, but the story went out. And as we were walking around, and I had to go in with other journalists from the FT and from the London Observer. I was helping them. And so I had to see what was to be seen 3 times, but I didn't get to write the story at the time. It was it was a big story. It was the correspondents who got to write it. And it was a very, very dark moment after the Israeli invasion of 1982, these massacres.